this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
This is Iris Palmer from Against All Odds with Iris Palmer. Okay, you guys, if you're anything like me and you're always on the go, this is a great new go-to, the McDonald's Caesar snack wrap. The now crispier McCrispy strip and Caesar sauce is la combinación perfecta. Add a Diet Coke and you're ready to take charge. Tiene el crunch, tiene el flavor, and it's only $2.99. Pricing and participation may vary. Try the Caesar snack wrap at participating McDonald's for a limited time. Que rico, you guys.
Oh, hear that? That's the Spam brand, singing you a love song. Spam, sizzle, pork, and
So, Rich, my son's 3.5, and he's getting a little bit interested in watching football, which is great. So, my wife and I, we alternate bedtimes every night with my daughter one night, then my son the next night, etc. So when I go up with him for nighttime, recently we've been opening up my phone and watching football highlights, which is amazing for me. It's a great bonding experience. And as we watch these highlights, he sits there and he points at it and he'll say things like, that me, when talking about like a wide receiver, making a great catch or something, and like a running back running down the field. Well, last night, we were sitting there, I opened up my phone and there were Minnesota Vikings highlights playing on YouTube that we were watching. And JJ McCarthy popped up on the screen and my son goes, that me. And I think he's the only person right now on planet Earth who's actually looking up to JJ McCarthy. I'm JJ, and over the last couple of years, I've been doing everything I can to be a best ball bro. And last season, things finally fell into place. I got 40th in the DraftKings Millie contest, taking home $20,000. Maybe I became a best ball bro, but I'm still looking to learn more about this game. And I still want others to come on this ride with me. So even if you consider me a best ball bro, this could be your year. This could be the year that you officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. We've partnered up with DraftKings again this year for Best Ball, and we've got a can't-miss offer on their biggest Best Ball contest ever. $20 million in total prizes. It's draft one, get one. Draft your team once, no weekly lineup management, and your top scorers start automatically each week, all season long. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app and sign up with promo code LATEROUND. Enter a lineup in the $20 million Best Ball contest for $25 and get a bonus ticket for a second entry. 2 shots at the title. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, joined as always by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, man?
Doing great, man. The season draws closer and closer. I've got my big East Coast draft in 3 weeks. I get to go play 2 of the worst rounds of golf that you've ever seen in your entire life the days prior. So looking forward to getting out and just excited about all the content and creeping closer to. We have the Hall of Fame game in a couple of days, JJ, tomorrow.
I know. It's really what's throwing me off is that the season starts later this year, just given the schedule for like Labor Day, like when Labor Day lands and stuff like that. And so it's throwing me off because like I usually do my regressions candidates episode in late July, but it was in early August this year. Everything's like a week later just because of the timing of everything. But I'm super excited for this time of year. I have so many drafts lined up. I did the Pros versus Joes draft this week that Fantasy Mojo puts together. It's basically a bunch of pros, if you will, myself and others who do this as their job, be touts, be fantasy analysts. And then we play against Joes, but the Joes are not just like someone that you find off the street. They're professional. They're people who play a whole lot of like high stakes fantasy football. And it's a best ball league. And that's always sort of like, you have Scott Fishbowl and then Pros versus Joes. They're both kind of like unofficial kickoffs for me of draft season. But obviously we've been doing best ball stuff for months at this point. I've been going to physical therapy. I had a couple sessions for something with my back. And, I was talking to my physical therapist about this and he was like, so like, how many teams do you draft? And I'm like, you don't you don't want to, because he's clearly not like a degen when it comes to fantasy football. And I was like, I think I've drafted close to like 400 or so. And he's like, what? Like, it's like not even a number. Like, he probably thought I was going to say like 10, and then you say 400, but then you have to explain best ball. And, I've been drafting since the Super Bowl ended, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, man, I love this time of year, and I'm excited to sort of dig into some topics today before we get to the guests, because we have some movement. We have some things changing in the fantasy football world right now.
We do. I just want to say it was really nice of you to get the regression episode over to Ben Johnson before you posted it on Tuesday. Yes,
I heard him talk about. I mean, he's not wrong. He's very correct that there's a lot of turnover luck and such that's going on with that Bears team. That there is regression coming, but I am still, as people know, very, very in on Ben Johnson's son, Luther Burden. The way that he's talking about Burden, I've been in too. I think I might be one of the only people on earth that likes Luther Burden as much as Ben Johnson does at this point. All right. What I wanted to do before we get to the guest is talk about some of the big items. Now, I talked about these items with the guest, so I don't want to I don't want to be too repetitive with what I talked about, in that segment. But there's obviously two really big things that have gone on this week. One being Malik Neighbors and the fact that we have video proof that he is seemingly cutting pretty well and doing pretty well with that knee. But then the other news being that Ricky Pearsall is officially done for the year. He's not going to be playing. And I'll in the name of transparency, I want to talk about both of these items because I screwed up both of them with my portfolio. Like I was drafting Pearsall. I think I was at
Did we really screw up the Pearsall one though? Like how can we,
I mean, I don't know. You look at social media and people are indirectly calling me a moron for how could you it's always after the injury happens. How could you possibly be buying into Ricky Pearsall? Same people who faded Christian McCaffrey last year are saying that, you know what I mean? Like that's the thing that, if anyone's like victory lapping an injury or what have you, and I get that there's, a player like Pearsall might seem like he's more injury prone. But people, players are injury prone until they're not. Chris Olave was injury prone until last year. He had the concussion issues and such. Christian McCaffrey was quite literally league winner, helped me win, 40th place in the Millie last year. If I were to fade him because of the potential injury issues, then I obviously wouldn't have had that success. So yes. Now I understand that I'm talking to people who just yell on social media when I say that, but I do think that it sucks. Right. And I don't do this show to simply say everything went right. I'm a genius. Look at me. I do this show because we go through ups and downs as a team, right? Where like we're all going through this together, not in a like really crazy way. Like this is such a tough journey. I just mean we're going through this as in this isn't entertainment. This is a hobby of ours. And I think that it's important for listeners and watchers to understand that I miss things too a lot. I get the wrong reads on the market all the time. And one of those wrong reads was Malik Neighbors, where I was kind of waiting for him to go on PUP. I thought it was going to happen and then it didn't. And I was hoping that I would get a little bit more. Like I thought he could be like a 5th round pick at some point. And so I didn't get enough Neighbors. Now that's the truthful, response to this is that I am sitting here right now having not gotten enough of that like 4th round value with Malik Neighbors, and now he's obviously risen in ADP. I do want to say though, we've been talking all summer about the flatness of round 3 and round 4 in drafts. Like I don't have much Chris Olave, for instance, right now, because I don't see that much of a difference between Chris Olave and some of the 4th round wide receivers, like a Jalen Waddle or something, in terms of like ceiling outcomes and where their seasons might go. And I love Chris Olave as a player. I'm just trying to be as level-headed as I can from a projection standpoint, or like Zay Flowers, right? And so I haven't gotten as much like Chris Olave because I just think that there's a flatness to that tier in general. And oftentimes, like, I will reach for a Zay, a Waddle, an Ibuka, whatever the case may be. And I'm only going to get an Olave when there's that falling value with him. So naturally, my exposure is just lower for a player like that. So my mentality, if I'm being completely honest with you guys, with the pretty much Neighbors fade up until recently, was that if we are saying that this is flat And if something positive happens with Neighbors, whereas ADP does rise, I can then be reactionary to that news and say, okay, well, if I know the opportunity cost isn't that much different from a round 4 to a round 3 pick, I'll just get him if he's in round 3. And the thing that I've really noticed through doing this like best ball bro journey is that, yeah, players are going to be pushed up draft boards, of course, like whenever positive news happens. Deebo Samuel is now an 11th round pick, whatever, whatever the case may be. But it doesn't happen immediately all the time in every draft that you do, because people are still going to be chained to what that ADP is on the platform, right? And so with Neighbors, it's going to take a little bit of time, and it has taken time for him to get to where I think he should probably be valued, which at this point, probably anywhere in round 3, it's fine to get Neighbors. And I've been scooping him up in round 3. And so as a result of that, I'm actually at like almost 7%, 6 to 7% with Neighbors in the millie. And this is through 104-ish drafts at this point. Like the other day, got him at 306, got him at 307 in one draft. Now I think that in drafts, if you're at the 2 spot, you can get him at 211 if you want to up the exposure a little bit, and then get the falling wide receiver value that you don't get in round 3 if you just want to up that exposure for Malik Neighbors. So in hindsight, I'm not that mad about the process. Now the result sucks, because of course I would rather have a 4th round Neighbors than a late 2nd or early 3rd or mid 3rd round Neighbors. Don't get me wrong. And the funny thing is, at this point, I still have favorable CLV because of where his ADP is now rising to, So I think the reactionary piece and how I've reacted was proper and smart and sharp, but it obviously burned me to not get him in the first place as much as I should have. And there's other people out there, other analysts who I respect, and even like Brandon Gadula was super heavy Neighbors, and I just was playing it a little bit safer because I just saw that flatness to that tier. It could burn me. And I do think that if I were to finish this off with one take for people who might have not drafted Neighbors, I don't think that it's that big of a deal if you still draft him in like late round 2 or something like that right now today, because if he's the guy, he's the guy. If he's the guy that you need, it doesn't really make a difference that half round to full round and ADP equity, in the end. Like if he's the dude that you need, he's going to dominate and your team's going to be good no matter what.
Yeah, and as a first round player last year, that's well within the realm of outcome, the range of outcomes if he is reasonably healthy. To me, so the World Series of Poker final table is going on right now. It started last night. It continues on ESPN throughout this week. And to me, a lot of this feels like just how you are approaching best ball this summer, right? If you're somebody who's playing a very high volume across a bunch of tournaments, then I think having a more measured approach like you had just makes sense. It's like the guys who have middling or high stacks at this final table where there's $10 million for first, and the value of their chips is such that going out in 9th place when you have a medium to high stack is an absolute disaster. So the one thing you must avoid is getting eliminated early. So preserving your stack and playing basically, small ball, make sure that you're at weight, at market, not doing anything crazy is fine. But if you're playing small volume, like I'm also overweight on my very few, like 24 or so drafts on Neighbors, because I'm seeing myself as the short stack. I literally have nothing to lose. So when there's somebody whose upside to me was such that they have a first round talent, I'm willing to assume more risk. But if you have an extremely wide portfolio with tons of entries, right? Assuming that level of risk with still a round 4 pick, right? Which is very valuable, is quite precarious. So yeah, I think having a large amount and just being at market and playing Neighbors safe was fine. Like you said, you were able, the best thing about this is we pivot quickly, right? We react to news. Yeah. August is a time, guys, where like things are going to happen very fast this month, right? And the market is going to move just as swiftly. So you just have to be ready to react and try to react in the correct manner.
Yeah, I also have been toying with the idea and like thinking about it, more like shower thought type stuff, but like this notion that I think is popular out there that best ball your best ball lineup has to be perfect in order to win, right? Where like, today, for instance, I was doing a live stream draft, which you guys can check out over on the YouTube channel. But I was doing a draft where I took AJ Brown in round 2. I don't have a ton of round 2 AJ Brown because I got a lot of my exposure for him in round 3 before he moved to New England. But, I got AJ Brown in round 2, and then I got Devontae Smith in round 3. He fell to like the 308. And I then got Drake May and Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts fell to the like later 7th area, right? So I have my 2 quarterbacks where I'm like, I'm done. I'm good. I don't need to get another quarterback. Later in the draft, I got a Jalen Naylor share, which is not a super, it's not like an uncommon thing. I think I'm about maybe like 6 to 9% or something like that with Naylor. And so I drafted Naylor, and then Fernando Mendoza went in the late 17th round of this draft to me. I picked him, right? And a lot of, there were some people that were chiming in being like, you didn't need another quarterback because you had Drake May and Jalen Hurts. And my response, like someone said, Mendoza's never going to hit your lineup when you have Drake May and Jalen Hurts. And my response was, I don't think that's a necessarily true statement that you have to make, even if you're making the assumption that things go in a really good direction for this lineup, which is what you should generally be doing, with your best ball lineups, because there can still be a 2 or 3 week period where one of those guys misses time, or there could just be a week where they both just have dud weeks, and maybe later in the season, Mendoza has a good one. Or in the fantasy playoffs, if this does advance, you have another stack that could potentially, do something for your team, when it matters most. And it's a differentiator because a lot of people would be stopping at Jalen Hurts and Drake May in their lineup, right? And so I think that like I've seen it too, where it's like, who's going to be the guy that you need this year? And I know that it's like an easy clickbait type thing, and it's like a meme worthy thing. And like, I understand all that. This is supposed to be fun in the end, but I also think that it dumbs things down a lot, where there are people who make this assumption that if you don't have neighbors, or if you didn't draft, because like, look, if Stephon Diggs signs with Washington tomorrow, like he's going to be what, like an 8th round pick in best ball. Like he's going to gradually lead his way up there, right? And he's like a 12th or 13th rounder right now. And so if you want to get CLV, you get CLV on Stephon Diggs right now and just draft him. I'm at like 18% Stephon Diggs. I'm waiting patiently. I need it to happen at this point because of the negative stuff that's gone on with me with like Ricky Pearsall and having like 11% Pearsall. But regardless of that, I don't think that if you faded Stephon Diggs, you're absolute dust. And the way that people talk about best ball is that you are absolute dust if you didn't have that player in that moment. Even like if you drafted Ricky Pearsall, I don't think those lineups are dead. It's a freaking 10th round pick. It's not going to sink your team. I do genuinely think that having gone through, because like year 1 of becoming a best ball bro, didn't have a very good advance rate, went way too 0 RB. I went away from like what I know from a fantasy football analyst perspective. And I wanted to change that last year. And so last year I did change it. And I really thought more deeply about it instead of being like robotic about my team builds and stuff. Had a crazy good advance rate. And when you have these teams in the playoffs and you're seeing them fall one by one and you're seeing how things sort of like work out, you realize that it's really not about perfection in the end, right? It is about, there's some luck involved. And to me, it's about smart team construction and good correlation for when those games do blow up. I had a San Francisco stack that was really good during the playoffs. I had, a Derrick Henry at the right time and Kyle Pitts at the right time. And that was a very fortunate thing to have, And so I think we got to get out of our head that like you're screwed because like you could get Neighbors in round 2. And yes, I would much rather have Neighbors in round 4. But what happens if one of those round 4 wide receivers is the actual guy that you need this year? And when you were drafting Malik Neighbors in round 4, you were missing out on Jalen Waddle, Luther Burden, and all these other guys who are actually better values at that point. You have no idea given when these guys actually hit and actually produce. So my overall stance on the CLV stuff is like, of course I want good CLV. Of course I want to draft a guy who goes round 8. I have a ton of Keenan Allen right now. I think if Keenan Allen signs with the Colts tomorrow, he's like, a 13th round pick all of a sudden after being a 19th, 20th round pick. And of course I want that value in my portfolio, but I'm also trying to stay level headed that yes, I have 17, 16% Stephon Diggs, whatever the number is right now. And if he rises in ADP to the 8th round after signing with Washington, let's say, that's great for my portfolio, but I'm not fooling myself to think that is the reason I'm going to have success or not success in best ball this year.
Yeah, it's always going to be hard for me to buy into just get the guys because we don't have any control over that. We don't have any control over Kyle Pitts going absolutely berserk when it matters.
Right.
Last year.
Having a literal historic game for tight ends. Like
we
who
have
predicted
no control over that.
Right.
We do have control over the construction of our roster, our game stacks, our team stacks, and the allocation of the roster spots. That is what we control, and that's what we should focus on. The getting the guys bit is just variance at the end of the day.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, man. I do really think that, because like there were teams last year that I had in the semis that were really well constructed, really, really strong. And then it's like, I had a pod with 4 Kyle Pitts teams. And it's like, it's just really hard to overcome that. And I'm not saying that best ball is then all luck. I don't think that's the case at all. Like,
no,
the way that I often view, luck versus skill in these kinds of games is like, okay, let's do a draft against my 8-year-old daughter. I would absolutely annihilate my daughter at fantasy football, so there's clearly a skill element involved. And trust me, there's people that are drafting in every other draft that I do in the Millie who are drafting like my daughter would, they're just picking the prettiest colors or something. And so like, this is certainly like something that like you're going to face competition that's weaker and that doesn't understand correlation, doesn't understand team roster construction and how to weigh, if you go running back early, you shouldn't be going running back late as much, or you don't need as many running backs, all that kind of stuff. There are so many ways to find edges. The bottom line, though, is that you got to get out, in my opinion, people need to get out of their head like this single guy is going to be the reason that we either win or lose in best ball. Now, could Malik Neighbors go absolutely bonkers in the playoff weeks and have like the greatest wide receiver season of all time? Yes. Yeah, I recognize that. But I'm also looking at just like what's realistic here. We don't even know if he's going to be ready week 1 yet. We have no idea, And so I'm just trying to be as level-headed as I possibly can. Maybe some of it's cope for sure. It's like I'm trying to, I'm a little bit upset that I had like very little Neighbors up until that point. But now that I like reacted the way that I did and I'm closer to market with Neighbors, I feel like I can more objectively even speak on this. I'm above I have 9.5 in my overall portfolio. I'm only talking about the Millie whenever I talk about the Neighbors equity and shares and stuff. So yeah, that's my overall thought. I know that people are gonna come at me with some sort of like cope type take with this, but I promise you, like I had a decent amount of like Debo still, or like when Diggs signs, I'm not gonna like sit there and be like, you guys are idiots for not, because it could go south. Like it's not a given that like things are gonna definitely work out for these players.
And to quickly circle back to your Mendoza pick, and it's so funny coming from you and what a lot of people perceive about you, but there is a lot of art in addition to the science when it comes to these drafts. And sometimes reading the room and being creative is just as important. And studying and solvers are great, but those tools also anticipate the rest of your room kind of acting in the same way. Like they can't regress for human nature in some of these instances. Right. So it's very important upon you to take the wheel yourself sometimes and do some creative stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of taking the wheel sometimes, I got to do that with some of my exposure to players, because I only have like 45 milli drafts left, I want to say. And the solvers interface is really nice because you can just upload a CSV of that you download on DraftKings. You can upload it to the solver and you can see your team builds, like the teams that have the best CLV at this point in time based on ADP. You can see, individual player exposures, etc. And and they also have a nice like draft board. And I know that I seem like I'm selling this. I use it daily. Okay. I'm just the period. You guys can check it out yourselves, but I use the solver. There's a link in the most recent YouTube video for the solver too, if you guys want to click through that, and because we are working with them this year. But regardless, I'm looking at the solver. There are some players I need to specifically beef up my exposure to, and this is the time of year where I will focus on that a little bit more. I have very little Quinshon Judkins and DJ Moore. I have not a lot of Josh Allen, David Montgomery, who I'm not even low on. It's just that I have gone after like Bashal Tutin in that range, and then one of the wide receivers that I just like that falls. Maybe a little bit more Trey McBride and Olave. Like I said, I could see myself upping that a little bit. But I think that the first 4, Judkins, DJ Moore, David Montgomery, Josh Allen, I need to get I want to have a nice blanket with a lot of those guys at this point. Season long's a different story. I think that some of those guys are actually like, I'm not drafting a ton of DJ Moore in season long because some of the platforms and his ADP is a little bit higher. Although even there, like when I look at my rankings versus where the platforms have him, I'm actually shocked that the platforms are as low on DJ Moore as they are. But I do want to try to get some of those players a little bit more. That's the other thing that's been on my mind this week.
It's so funny. None of these players have budged the entire summer. It's crazy.
Right.
Josh Allen, difference 0.9 spots. DJ Moore, 1.7. Montgomery, 0.7. Judkins 1.1. These guys have been cemented into their draft slots.
There was one draft where I got Josh Allen at like 310 or something like that. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll just reach for DJ Moore in the 4th and just kind of do it because not risk it, because it's very rare for him to go in like the late 5th at this point. And someone in the 11 spot took DJ Moore at 402, so I couldn't get him at 403. I was like, are you kidding me right now? Like, that's just the kind of stuff that seems to happen all the time. I think in there's reasons as to why I haven't been as heavy on some of these guys. The David Montgomery thing is more so like, I do think that he is like a traditional dead zone archetype, but I also think that there's a very real chance he just sees a lot of volume in general. So I'm not fading him. I'm certainly not fading him. I'm actually higher than like season long platforms on Montgomery. The Judkins stuff though is like, I am a little worried about what his receiving work might look like and how bad the Browns are going to be. The Josh Allen stuff, I'm worried about taking on that opportunity cost for a quarterback, or like DJ Moore, terrible last 2 seasons, like just not good per route run. So I think there's a lot of risk there, but I still want to get some exposure because I could see a scenario where DJ Moore has a good season, of course. And I want to weigh my exposure for like the probability of certain events happening. And I'm just not there with some of these players.
It's really hard to click, especially if you have some sort of balanced build or some sort of RB heavy start. It's just really hard to click David Montgomery at the top of the 5th round. I'm not a fan of
Tutin's right there, but like right. You have to. I have to be level headed and just say to myself, there's a very realistically, if we were to say, what are the odds that David Montgomery is better this year in fantasy football versus Bashal Tutin? If we're being kind, like, and like just pretty realistic about it, it's probably like a 60-40 type thing.
Yeah, I said 35%. That was the number that popped into my head.
Yes. And I think this is the exercise that everyone should be doing, unless you're doing like 10 drafts, and you just get your guy. That's fine. But I need to be smarter about that sometimes because, and look, I was definitely like drafting Tutin because I could see a scenario where he would be going higher, and he has been going higher. Like I got 6th round Tutin at times.
I was going to say Tutin's like, also up 7 spots since we started doing it.
Yeah. But at this point, it's like, okay, I know that I have Tutin. I know that I'm good there. I need to mix it up a little bit more, just given the actual probability of these events happening. And this isn't, to me, David Montgomery is not like a Chuba Hubbard last year situation, in my opinion. Like, this is a player who has a backbone, who has done more as a receiver throughout his career. I was much more concerned about Rico Dowdle last year for Chuba than I am Woody Marks for David Montgomery, if I'm being honest. So I'm not going to be overweight on Montgomery, but I do need to get more just to feel a little bit more comfortable, just given those odds. Ask those questions as you're drafting if you're doing a lot of drafts. It's an important thing to do. With that being said, let's get to our guest. I talked to Matthew Betz this week. He has a very unique angle to things because he's a physical therapist. And so he has real tangible evidence to give takes on sort of what's going on in training camp right now with all of the injury news that pops up. But he's a physical therapist. He's a lead writer, injury expert, DFS analyst at the Fantasy Footballers. We talked about how he sifts through training camp news, which is a very important topic this time of year, obviously. We talked about how to handle the San Francisco wide receivers. We didn't really dig into that just now. We did talk about Malik Neighbors, but we also, what I didn't reveal is where we thought, and Betz talked about this, where he thought Malik Neighbors could go to by the time August ends. So, we didn't get into that just now. I just wanted to more talk about the CLV stuff. We talked about Josh Allen's ADP. We talked about a lot. It was a great interview. Great time talking to Betz. So with that being said, here's the interview with Betz. All All right, Betz. We finally have some camp news. We're finally here. It's actually season-long season, not just best ball season. So training camps are going. We're seeing some news come out from beat reporters, etc. How do you sort of handle keeping a level head this time of year and not, I guess I would say, like, overdraft zeros? Like, get so hyped on a player, whether it's a Cyrus Allen, a Caleb Douglas, whatever the case may be. And I think that they're fine for the record, but just as examples, and not getting too hyped on them to the point where you're drafting them in a non 20th round on DraftKings, let's say, and they end up being zeros.
Yeah, it's tough this time of year. It kind of feels like you're, what's the saying, like drinking out of a water hose at sometimes, where it's just like, we have no news, right, for like 3 or 4 weeks in a row. We get a little bit in mini camp and OTAs, and then it's kind of the dead period, and then it's all of a sudden we're getting news left and right. And it's not just like actual, like factual news as far as injuries and stuff like that, but it's just the beat reporters' opinions on how players look. And you want to try to figure out like how much of that matters, if at all. Does it matter at all? And how do you adjust your strategy and your rankings and your takes? And I think back to last year. Do you remember the Keandre Lambert-Smith?
Yes.
Summer that was, like August? He and Bill just absolutely destroyed August last year, right? And Ja'Cory Cross-Kamara ended up being like a great closing line value player. KLS ended up being a complete zero. And so for every Bill that there is, there's also a Keandre Lambert-Smith. And I try to remind myself that when I get super excited about, a 4th round rookie or a 6th round rookie or whatever it is. So I'm going to be an old curmudgeon here when I say this. Camp news matters to me, but I don't really care at all about like beat reporter opinions of how players look. I don't care about what they think about like the zip on the ball when the player throws it, or hey, this guy looks super explosive, and it's like, okay, well, sure, pads aren't on yet, like great. So I try to filter a lot of stuff, to be honest with you. I think we can get in trouble like kind of chasing our tails a little bit.
I agree. I mean, I think that you nailed it in terms of like thinking about historical hit rates too, of like day 3 wide receivers. Like, we know factually that day 3 wide receivers do not pan out. I mean, it's a horrific hit rate, right? Like for every Puka Nacua, there's quite literally hundreds of wide receivers who do absolutely nothing. And the KLS thing was something that popped into my mind too. Even when like Brendan Thompson's getting some love right now. And I think he fits seamlessly into what Mike McDaniel would want to do there. But at the same time, we just have to be realistic about what kind of volume a player like that might see. I feel similarly about like a Cyrus Allen right now, where I've thrown the 20th round dart actually more frequently than I'd like to admit with Cyrus Allen, right? But I'm also doing so with builds where the rest of my roster looks and feels really, really good up until that point, where you can kind of like, if it is a zero, hopefully it's not completely, you got a lot of ADP value beforehand and it's not completely destroying, or you're not completely reliant on that player. But I agree. I think most of the time, these are situations where like, just kind of think logically about what's going on, or like even like an already established player, sort of established player, like a Luther Burden, like, I love Luther Burden, but a lot of that has to do with the prospecting work I did. And then obviously what we saw last year, as opposed to like, Ben Johnson's basically treating him like his son at this point in the way that he's talking about him, right? So I totally agree. But I do have a follow-up because, I think it wouldn't be fair if this was the first episode that I did post official news with Ricky Pearsall, and that 49ers wide receiver room is now wide open. And then on top of that, you've had that drumbeat going with Dezon Stribling, the early 2nd rounder from the draft this past April. So my question to you is just straight up, like, how are you handling things with Pearsall now that he's officially out for the year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the hardest thing to do in this game is avoid zeros in best ball. And unfortunately, if you were drafting early and you were taking some Pearsall, like that stings for sure.
Yeah.
I find myself, though, like on the flip side of that with Stribling, like I didn't think he was a great prospect. I think a lot of people agreed on that from a numbers perspective. I know like when we got to NFL draft, like the weeks leading up, there was so much like buzz, like NFL is higher on Stribling than you realize. Right. And sure enough, he did go 33rd overall. So at some point you have to at least give that some credence. And now the Pearsall injury on top of that, has kind of created this like perfect storm for him to just fly up draft boards. With the Debo signing, hopefully that keeps it in check a little bit. But I've been behind on my exposure to Stribling, and it's not because I thought he was like a horrific pick where he was going previously. It was just like, man, we've seen this story so many times with like not the greatest analytical profiles getting opportunities and just falling on their face. And so I was kind of behind the 8 ball. And now I'm finding myself where I want to play catch up, but I don't want to chase him up the board, where I think he could get to a point where I think he's a bad bet. Like where he goes now, I think he's still fine. But if he's starting to get into the I don't know, 120s, like that kind of range where it's like on DraftKings, like the quarterback window. And if you miss that, like good luck, brother. I'm probably out when he gets there. But like I said, maybe the Debo signing kind of helps keep things in check. I think he's fine. I'll probably come in somewhere around like 6 to 8%, be a total coward and, get my exposure and not take a huge stand one way or the other. But I'm always skeptical of these guys flying up the draft board.
I would agree. And I also think, and this is something that I want to get to, and we'll talk about it in just a second with Malik Neighbors, but I also am thinking about the true opportunity cost in missing out on some of those players and then buying into them later and just eating that CLV and just eating the fact that, you could have gotten Stribling in round 16, 17, and now he's round 13, let's say, right? Like, what truly is the delta and the difference there? Unless, Stribling does, because I think there is a chance that we even see him rise more if like positive camp news starts flying, if we get takes from certain analysts that they're very high on him, whatever the case may be. I do think that there's going to be a wall though. Like it would be shocking if he's like a top 10 round pick or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, like in that quarterback wall range. Right. And so where he's going now, I would agree. And I would also say that like, as someone who also, I think I was at like 3% or 4% before a lot of the news started dropping. I might be at like 5% right now. I truly don't think the delta in opportunity cost is that significant between a round 13 and a round 17 pick. Like if you look at true hit rates. Now, the players that in terms of the confidence that we feel in those guys in round 13 versus 17 is definitely going to be different. But when you look at like true outcomes, it's just not so big to me that I feel bad about eating that CLV. Are you sort of in the same boat?
Yeah, I agree. I think back to last year, one example of this was Keenan Allen before he signed with the Chargers.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people being like, if you didn't get the best price on Keenan, like don't take him. And like at some point, a player will keep outperforming their ADP up to a certain threshold, right? Like Keenan didn't get crazy expensive, but people were like reluctant to take him in the 10th or 11th round. And like you're saying, like what's the difference between the 11th round and like the 14th round?
Right.
Not really much. I like to compare it around the players that they go around. So like right now, Stribling kind of gets up to like the 140s, generally speaking, sometimes 150s if you're lucky. But like in the 140s, like it's Woody Marks and Isaiah Pacheco and like those types. And it's like, okay, like sure, Stribling could easily be a better pick than those guys. So yeah, I think, like I said, I think he's fine where he goes, but I'll definitely be price sensitive kind of as the summer goes on.
Yeah, and look, I really want to talk to you about this because you are a physical therapist and you have a really unique perspective on not just fantasy football because of that, but obviously the injury side of things. And so I'm curious about where you're at in best ball in particular with Malik Neighbors, Cam Scadaboo, and Quinshad Judkins, because maybe this is a little bit of cope, okay? Because I was certainly not going heavy Malik Neighbors, and that's clearly a mistake. That's you're going to make mistakes drafting early, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's been things that went right. There's going to be things that go wrong. I'm trying to look at this pretty objectively, but we've said throughout the summer that that round 3 and round 4, over on DK, especially the difference in player is not that dramatic, right? Like it's a relatively flat wide receiver tier in particular. And so to me playing catch up on Neighbors and getting him over the last week, mid round 3, early round 3, as opposed to mid round 4, I actually don't feel that bad about it because I don't think that there's that big, like we're talking about not drafting Chris Olave or someone, or like, I love Zay Flowers, but like Zay, and then flipping that around and then getting like Luther Burden can still, or Terry McLaurin, like they can still outperform Zay Flowers this year, right? Like if you're going to look at that head to head. And so I'm looking at it. I mean, you can tell me if I'm coping a little bit here, right? With the lack of Neighbors, and I've gotten more, thankfully. But where are you at in best ball with a guy like Neighbors, with a guy like Scadaboo, with a guy like Judkins? And then how do you feel from like a game theory perspective about Neighbors in particular?
Yeah, I guess we can start with the least to most exciting of that trio, in my opinion, and the most exciting being Malik Neighbors, which I think is a really tricky conversation. As far as the other guys, I don't have a super strong take on Scadaboo. Like, I think his health is trending in a good direction. He reportedly had been doing great in the offseason with his recovery, and we've seen nothing but positivity from that aspect since he basically started doing football activities, and now is kind of not just being eased into camp, but like kind of his full go here. And he was already running some routes in OTAs and minicamp, so that potentially was something we could see coming. The problem that I have on the Giants, just in general, is we're kind of putting a lot of stock in a Jackson Dart year 2 leap. We're putting a ton of stock in Harbaugh. And, not to get like too game theory on this, but I saw somewhere that the over 7.5 wins was the most bet win total in the entire board this year. And so whenever like the crowd is thinking one way on certain teams, I'm always like, wait a minute, hold on now. Yeah, what are we doing here? So I think the Giants have a chance to be one of those teams that outperform expectations for sure. I also think they could be pretty middling, and you're paying a premium on two of their top weapons that may not pay off. So I'm kind of just right in line with where Scottaboo goes. I don't have a strong take on Judkins. I'm definitely lower than market, not necessarily from an injury perspective, but just from a primarily early down runner on what we project to be a bad team. And where he goes, generally speaking, I'm looking at some of the wide receivers that are available that I really like there. And then we've talked about this, on other shows, and I'm sure you talked about this with some of the quarterbacks that will fall into like the 5th and 6th range. When Lamar is falling there, he's a great target in my opinion. Sometimes you can get like Drake May, or if Judkins falls around that range, and it's like, man, that's a tough bet for me to make on Judkins over those guys. And so I don't have much Judkins. I have, I think, 4%, and I don't see that really coming up unless he falls well past ADP. Neighbors is tough though, man, like, because we had all negative news all offseason. And then now we have this kind of like influx of positivity, which was not previously there, of like, oh, not only am I out there participating, like I'm going to be likely ready for week 1. And the way that I was viewing the situation was back in like February, March, April, I was like, there's a good chance he's starting on PUP and then ramping up from there. And so when you're talking about that type of archetype and that type of recovery, it's a really thin bet to be like, hey, this is going to be the guy that comes back to full health in week 10 and be the guy you need in week 17. Of course, Neighbors is talented. He could do it. But now we flipped and we're like, oh, he's going to be ready for week 1. Maybe there's like a 3 to 4 week ramp up, and then he could just be Malik Neighbors. And if you're getting that at around 4 or 5 costs, like that's a huge win in your closing line value portfolio, which fortunately I do have a little bit of. The problem for me with Neighbors is every time I'm trying to play catch up right now, there's always somebody else in my drafts that is willing to take him like 2 or 3 spots earlier than me. So I'm still stuck at like 5% Neighbors. And I saw him in a couple drafts I did recently the last week. He went at the end of the 2nd round. So like, I think round 2 Neighbors is coming. And so I don't want to like fade him at this point, because I do think there's a chance that he could be awesome this year. The tricky thing is for me though, where he goes, there's so many good bets around him that if somebody else is willing to chase him up, just knowing, hey, he is coming off ACL and meniscus surgery. We're putting a lot of stock in Dart for year 2. Is the Matt Nagy offense, et cetera, et cetera. Like I'm willing to kind of, for this slate of best ball, for this slate of, DFS, if you want to kind of frame it that way, I'm willing to be underweight Neighbors, but it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, like it seems he's consistently been at least like a 2-3 turn type player at this point. Like you were saying, like into the 2nd round. I did a live stream on Friday, got him at 306, which was, nice. I feel #blessed for that one, right? Because just to up the exposure a little bit, and we're just not seeing, him fall quite as frequently like that. But again, I do think that you're gonna hit that wall. Like, to me, given like the injury concerns, am I wrong to say that like they still exist for, once the season gets going? Like if he's ramping up the way that he's ramping up, and let's say we don't see him in the preseason at all, and we're just getting practice reports and that he's practicing and seems fine, and like we've seen the routes already and him running them, and cutting via these videos, like when week 1 begins, you wouldn't be expecting, I mean, this might be like a leading question, but you wouldn't be expecting him to like be 100% right away, would you?
I would not. It's still going to take a few weeks of game action to kind of ramp back up. And the trickiest thing for players coming off this ACL procedure or any major surgery really is getting the confidence like in game action to actually trust yourself again. It's great to be able to run routes against air with shorts on and all those things, but that's just kind of step 1 in the recovery here as you get back into real football shape. And so I think it's also possible you see the Giants kind of like push and pull this thing where it's like, let's push him for 2 or 3 days in a row. All right, let's give him a day off. Let's see how he recovered. If it's going great, let's keep doing that plan. If he's struggling with swelling or soreness or whatever, we're going to back off. And so right now there's so much positivity. I'm not trying to like scare anybody or anything like that, but there's also a world that exists where you get a couple weeks into camp, it's not feeling as good as it was 2 weeks ago. Now we kind of dial back. So I'm just, like I said, hesitant to kind of push him up into mid round 2, which I think he could close there, which for me is kind of a tough bet, even with the surgery and the recovery. We've seen players do well in the first year off ACL surgery in recent years, like Cooper Kupp's year, a handful of years back. Chris Godwin had a nice season off the first one. So it does happen, but that is not necessarily the norm, so to speak.
Yeah, it feels like if you think about this only in a positive light and that things just only get better and better up until the start of the season, you're going to see him. I mean, where do you think he maxes out at? Like mid-round 2-ish? Like, do you think that he goes 1-2 turn if like things are only positive from here on out? Or do you think it's like a Drake London, like him or Drake London type scenario?
I could see him going earlier than AJ Brown and earlier than Drake London in the second round. But I'd be surprised if he gets above like the Genty Barkley 1-2 turn kind of guys. I think mid round 2 is probably the ceiling. I could be wrong though.
I feel like at that point, even just from like a game, that's why like I want to at least get as much as I can right now if he's falling into the third, just because then that way maybe I'll be a little bit underweight, but not as underweight as I could have been.
For sure.
All right, we're in August now, and I think that this is when we mentally start thinking about drafts, a little bit differently than we did in May or June. Do you do things like forcing exposure a little bit more, or are you just still trying to draft as optimally as you can?
I think for the most part, drafting optimally, but I definitely am checking exposures way more frequently now than I was in May and June. Whereas like, May and June, I don't know about your frequency, but I try to save most of my drafts, especially for like the millie as we get more information in July and August. So early on, it's kind of just one of those like, hey, I got nothing to do. Let's pop up in a draft. Yeah. More of the vibes based, if you will. And then you get to later in the year and you actually care a lot more about what your teams look like and exposures and things like that. So there are moments now where I am actively checking, and I normally would take player A first because I'm ranked higher. I think they have a better outlook, whatever. But, I'll look at my exposures and be like, I already have 18%. Do I need more, And so I'll take the other guy just to kind of balance some stuff out. So I am definitely looking more at exposures and adjusting accordingly. The other thing I'm doing in rounds 18, 19, 20 that I was not doing in the earlier part of the year is like being willing to take a little bit more risk as we get more information. And we talked about that with like the KLS example, Cyrus Allen. Like there is still a ton of landmines in this range, but in May and June, like, give me Cooper Kupp, give me a fourth tight end, like give me guys that I know are like making the team and not giving me zeros when we have no information to go off of. Now, when we start to get information like last year at this time, you could still get Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in rounds 18, 19, 20. Then we finally got the Brian Robinson news and then things took off. So right now, the way that I framed it on our show is like, there are no like quote unquote good picks in the 20th round. Like nobody's like excited to click these guys. You don't have like a lot of conviction, but there will be good clicks, I think, in this range in maybe 2-3 weeks, get preseason information, training camp injuries, what have you. And so in those aspects right now, I'm trying to like save some drafts to get that group of guys. Whereas in May and June, I'm taking like the most boring players.
Yeah. The other thing to think about too is that like a player like Cyrus Allen, let's say, like back in May, no one was really taking him in the 20th round, right? So you have a ton of drafts back then that just have zero Cyrus Allen. And so you're going to get, up on the market just based on that alone. So that's something to keep in mind too. But I definitely agree with you that it's a lot easier to kind of throw crazier darts as opposed to going with the safer guys.
Do you have some crazy darts that you're targeting right now besides Cyrus Allen?
I mean, to be honest with you, I've been going with the trying to like, I have so much like Keenan Allen, right? Like I've just because I can envision a scenario where he goes to like the Colts and then all of a sudden, he's a 14th round pick or something like that. And you're at least getting a little bit of CLV. I don't think that it's like that big of a deal from a CLV standpoint, again, like with that late of a pick, but I actually think that Allen would be like a decent bet to get like, I didn't think he was nearly as bad as people think last year, for instance. Right. So it's also a talent based one. But like Eli Raridan's a good example of this, where like I'm much more okay, especially in 4 tight end builds, throwing that dart, because back in May and June, we had no clue. Like I loved him as a prospect. He was my tight end 3 in the class, but like we had no clue what kind of role that would look like. But all the positive, hype around him and the way that New England seems to, and beat reporters are talking about him and him playing with the first team. Yeah, it makes me feel a little bit better about him having at least some role this season. And if you're getting him in around 20, which you are, and again, he's another one of those guys that wasn't always drafted. So you can get a little leverage there.
Yeah, for sure. Keenan's interesting. I don't know if you saw, there was like a report over the weekend from Rap Sheet, and maybe this will come out after our recording, like maybe more than we do. But apparently Debo had an offer from the Colts, chose to go to the Niners. Yeah. And so I'm like, is it a matter of time now before the Keenan Allen signing, which has maybe cool off a little bit on Josh Downs, who I was into previously. But I do think the Colts are adding somebody.
Yeah, I think they have to at this point. Like,
They have
and
to.
there's been a lot of dot connecting with Keenan Allen. I mean, maybe it's I've been going after a lot of those guys, and of course, Debo was the one of the three of Diggs, Allen, and Debo that I was probably not getting enough of. I still had some, like, it wasn't like I was a zero with him, but I wish I was more overweight with him, obviously. But even him, like again, I don't want this to be taken as like, this is the CLV type play that's so important. I don't think it's that important in the end. Cause like Debo's not going in a spot right now where, and I don't think it's going to rise that dramatically, where like, if you didn't get that much Debo in round 15 and he's like a round 12 guy now, it just doesn't, it's just, to me, not a big enough deal to like get worked up over.
For sure.
Do you wish you had more round 15? Of course. Do I wish I had more round 4 Malik Neighbors? Yeah, of course. But and especially Neighbors, because if he does go in round 2, then it's a bigger deal. But yeah, I try to at least be level headed about that, because like in the end, if Debo's the dude that you need for whatever reason, which I don't think anyone would be, staking that claim, but if Debo's the guy that you need, it doesn't really matter where you draft him.
Right.
Like if you get him in round 8, then it's fine. So, I'm trying not to like be overly critical about that kind of thing. All right, I want to talk about Josh Allen, because he's sort of a really controversial topic. Brought him up a few times on this show, and we've had some analysts that are very, very high on him. We've had some that are fading him mostly. Where are you at with Josh Allen specifically on DraftKings this year?
Depends on the room you're in as far as what people think about Josh Allen. You have these weird rooms on DraftKings that he will go in the second round, and personally, I will never be doing that. But there are times where he'll fall to the back of the third. And when I want to get some Josh Allen exposure, I'm doing it at that price. And I actually think with Malik Neighbors coming up, you're going to see a couple guys come down just because somebody has to. Yep. And I've seen Josh Allen in the last week or two be available at like the 28th pick, 29th pick. And at those prices, like I'm interested. But when he would go close to the 2-3 turn, for me, I just prefer the bets relative to cost of like Lamar, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Jalen Hurts, etc. But at some point, Josh Allen is a great pick. He continues to be a top tier producer at quarterback year over year. They got the Dolphins in week 17. So like, can you envision a world where Josh Allen's the guy you needed to win the Millie in week 17? Of course. Yeah. So I'm not full fading, but I'm trying to be selective in terms of like getting the best price on him, if that makes sense. I've only got 3% right now, but we still have all of August to go. So hoping to get that up. And like I said, with Malik Neighbors coming up, I think Josh Allen will come down a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. And part of the problem for me is that like I'm not high on DJ Moore this year, but I don't think I've done like 100 milli drafts, and I don't think I've drafted DJ Moore yet, and it's bad. Like that's bad. But it's also tied to Josh Allen, because you're picking quarterbacks based on the pass catchers that you draft early a lot of times, right? But it's like the inverse with Buffalo, because Josh Allen goes so early. And so, I'm probably with you. I think I'm at like 4% with Allen right now. And oftentimes, like when I get him, it's like, of course, this team is drafting DJ Moore really, really early, and I miss out on him, right? And so I'm trying to work with that a little bit. But I'm with you. I'm not going to be overweight on Allen, but late round 3 into round 4 makes a lot of sense. Sticking with the onesies and these, quarterback and tight ends, I'm assuming Brock Bowers is your tight end one, because that's been okay. My question to you, though, we're seeing Colston Loveland get pushed up a lot. I was actually in Pros versus Joe's draft last night for that contest, and Colston Loveland went as the tight end 2 in that draft, just straight up ahead of Trey McBride. So my question to you is, do you have more Loveland than McBride when you factor in ADP? And would you ever take Loveland just straight up over McBride?
I haven't done that yet. I don't know that I would. I think it would take a camp injury to Burden or Roma Dunes there or something like that to really make that move for me. But Loveland's a guy I've loved since he came into the league. So like, huge on his talent. I took a ton of him last year. Unfortunately, the breakout happened just a little bit too late for it to really matter in best ball. But Loveland I think is an awesome target where he goes. I have seen him get pushed up though. And then when he's getting into like, late to mid, third round, comparing him to when you used to be able to get him in the 5th round and late 4th, it's kind of that closing line value conversation. I fortunately already have a decent clip of Loveland, so I'm not going to chase him up the board. I went into the offseason being like, Trey McBride, gotta fade him, right? We always talk about regression, and I think we can like over regress players in our minds. Like we're like, at some point you're like, he's probably a good click where he goes. When he was going in the 2nd round, I was not taking McBride, but now he's another guy with the Neighbors thing that I've seen him fall to like the middle to back of the 3rd, which just was not happening at all in May or June. And so at this point, I will start to mix in some more McBride, but I have a lot more Loveland, relatively speaking, at cost, and I prefer him for sure, when we talk about cost, I think it's possible Loveland has a better year than McBride, but I don't want to over regress McBride to the point where, we're overthinking it. We did that with James Cook a couple years ago, and technically he did regress, but he had more volume, and so he was still awesome. And so, at some point, every player is a good pick.
Yeah, no, I'm with you with McBride. I think McBride is a much, much easier fade in season long just because of his cost. I mean, there's some platforms where he literally goes ahead of Brock Bowers in season long. So that it just makes it an easier way to deal with it. But I agree. I mean, when he falls to mid to late round 3, it's a pretty decent click in my opinion, especially if Loveland is followed up right after, because I do think that McBride straight up, I would still be taking over Loveland, even though I do love Colson Loveland as well. All right. So in this scenario with tight ends, let's say that Tyler Warren is off the board. Okay. So you're looking after that tight end 4 spot. Who would be your favorite value after Tyler Warren's gone?
I don't want to be too much of a homer here. I'm going to go with Dallas Goedert.
Yeah.
We just talked about regression with McBride. Like Kevin Patullo, was doing some weird stuff last year at the goal line with like underhand shovel passes to Goddard and like scheming him touches inside the 5-yard line. Like that's not happening again.
Yeah.
But that's obviously baked into the price. He's not going as a tight end 3 where he finished last year. So just thinking about the Eagles offense, I think it's just going to look so different than anything we've seen in the last 3 or 4 seasons. And I think a huge part of it is going to be featuring the tight end in heavier personnel sets. We lost AJ Brown, and of course, everybody's doing the connection of Brown's gone, and therefore Devonta Smith, huge value spike. We're excited about Mekhi Lemon and all those things, but nobody's really talking about Dallas Goedert. And when AJ Brown's been off the field, it's a smaller sample size, but he's averaging over 2.9 yards per out run in those situations. So Goddard is like a super boring click. Like I don't think he's like, you're not telling your friends that you picked Dallas Goedert in this draft. But I think as a tight end 1 for a 3 tight end or 4 tight end build, I'm cool with that. I think there's some fun builds where you can kind of double tap in this kind of like tier 3 to 4-ish range with 2 of these guys and be done at tight end. I think that's interesting. So just buying into the Eagles offense being way more efficient than it was last year. Goddard is a really cheap way to do that.
Yeah, by the time this episode airs, the regression episode that I did will be out, and I talked about the Eagles offense. One of the craziest things about the Eagles offense is even Saquon Barkley last year had 14 goal line rushes. Now, a lot of them weren't at like the 1 because they end up tush pushing. He scored once within the 5-yard line last year on those 14 goal line rushes. I'm with you. I mean, you know too, given the fandom and such, but this is a team that should look so much different without Kevin Patullo running things. So I love that call out of Dallas Goedert. Someone that we haven't really talked about on the show throughout the summer, but I think it's a really, really good call out in value. I want to ask you what I asked Adam Levitan last week, because I think there's a very real chance that this running back wall, in round 1 into round 2 could be where leagues are won this year, hypothetically. So my question to you is, do you have any favorites from the group, and do you have any fades from that group?
There are so many good picks in round 2 this year. It's like hard to find somebody that is a quote bad pick. And so I've mostly kind of spread out exposure here, is with the exception of there's one guy I want to get a little bit more of than other folks, and that is Ken Walker. Yeah. I definitely want to be in on that. Just kind of, I think the Chiefs are telling us what's going to happen this year. Mahomes coming off multi-ligament knee surgery. Rashee Rice literally rehabbed the knee injury in jail. Who knows how good Xavier Worthy is? Travis Kelce is another year older. Dude's 37 years old playing NFL football. Yeah. And they finally, after years of bargain shopping at running back, said enough is enough. Like, this is the offense. So I think the Chiefs offense will look a lot different this year. So I want to be in on Ken Walker. I want a lot of Bowers this year for sure. I know that's not the running back, but in round 2. And then the other guy that I'm definitely overweight on is Saquon Barkley for the reasons you mentioned, just kind of buying into like Eagles offense was not good last year, but we know this can be a top 5 unit if things click. And so the offensive line should be healthier and all those things. So those are kind of the 2 running backs I want to be a little more overweight on. I am going to plan to be underweight Devon Achane, and it's mostly just for the systemic team level concerns with uncertain quarterback play, uncertain play caller, first time head coach, et cetera, et cetera. I only have 2% right now, and that is terrifying for how good Devon Achane is, but I definitely plan to fade there and hope for the best.
Is that your early round player that you would be most nervous about entering the season, of someone that you've, largely faded or not been in enough? Because I'm with you with Achane. Like, I will get him if he falls enough, which it does sometimes. He'll fall to like the late second because everyone's sort of on this train. He's much easier to fade in season long. I mean, I was accidentally autoed Achane in a league over the weekend because I was away with the family, and fortunately I was able to correct the auto pick, but it was Achane as like the RB5 on this platform. And so that's not what we're seeing in best ball at all, right? So I think he's an easier fade in season long. I am underweight in best ball as well, but is that the player, if you look at the early rounds, that you're most nervous about kind of burning you?
So it's actually, I mean, he is one, but it's not him. It's actually George Pickens.
Ooh, nice.
And it's not because I don't think Pickens has a ceiling. I mean, we've seen it obviously with Dallas, especially when CeeDee Lamb missed time. But I think back to like in previous iterations of best ball, it's been really tough for these kind of second wide receivers in an offense that go at this part of the draft to really pay off ADP. Like you think about the years where AJ Brown was a first round pick and Devonta Smith would go at the 2-3 turn. Never really worked, right? Like there were the years where Jamar Chase would go early and then T. Higgins would be like the 20th pick off the board. Didn't really work, right? Like, so like, I know best ball is a different game where you're hoping for spike weeks at the right time and you're putting all these players in a blender and just hoping you get the right outcomes at the right times and weeks. But just thinking about what we used to pay for Pickens over the last couple of years, I thought he was one of the best picks on the board last year in the 4th and 5th round. Now we're paying a premium on what just happened, and it's just hard to repeat in the NFL. So he's been a guy that I've been struggling with, and it's not because I think he's a bad player. It's just the cost. That's really it.
Yeah, I get it. And now Neighbors is in that range too, and it makes you want to go in that direction instead. All right, before I let you go, I need a bold prediction, fire stance about something that's going to happen in this 2026 fantasy football season.
All right. I went back and forth on a couple of things here, but I think I'm going to go with this one.
Yeah.
Everything went wrong for the Bucs last year, right? Offensive line injuries, Baker was banged up, Mike Evans missed time, Ibuka missed time or battled through a hamstring injury, Godwin was banged up. My bold take here, and now Baker is playing with a chip on his shoulder with the contract thing. I think Emeka Ibuka leads the league in receptions this year.
Ooh, I love
that's going to be my bold take.
I love that. I've been watching. I finished Quarterback. It was like my Peloton Zone 2 show for a little while. I finished it up, and every clip of Baker that they showed last year, I not only said, man, I forgot that he was like an MVP conversation for the first like 6 weeks of the season, but then I was like, man, Emeka Ibuka really was awesome to start last year. Like he was great. And I'm in on Ibuka this year, so I like hearing that you are as well. I love that bold call. Betz, this was awesome though. Let everyone know what you're working on, where they can find you, all that great stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate it, JJ. This was great. Happy to do this. I think the second year in a row. So appreciate you having me back on. But yeah, you all can find me everything with the Fantasy Footballers, whether it's the Dynasty podcast, the DFS and Betting podcast, and then updating literally daily now in the Ultimate Draft Kit, best ball rankings and news information, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, everything with the Fantasy Footballers, and then on Twitter at the Fantasy PT.
Yes, invaluable stuff. Make sure you are checking out the Late Round Draft Guide. You can find all the info on that over on lateround.com. Otherwise, everyone, as always, thanks for tuning in.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.